joining us today. My name is Lindsey, and I also have Kevin, another MoonPrep counselor, with us. Um, we I guess I should introduce myself first, and then I'll have Kevin introduce him. But I am a SAT, ACT tutor, and I've also been a MoonPrep counselor for about 4 years now, helping students kind of throughout the entire process. And so we're really excited to kind of bring this behind the scenes curtain with you for you today about how to impress college admissions officers um, with your resume. But I'll have Kevin introduce himself first.
Sure. So my name is Kevin Trudell. I am a former UC Berkeley graduate admissions counselor. I've been working for about 6.5 years now, helping students as a college admissions counselor. And I'm excited to get to work with Lindsey today to show you how to impress folks like myself with your activities, especially given the pandemic and the need to get a little bit creative and setting some of that up.
Perfect. So I'll explain a little bit about the company and why we think you should be listening to us. So MoonPrep is made up of a team of independent college counselors who work with students virtually and guide them through not only the college admissions process, but also high school. And so the counselors at MoonPrep kind of serve as that guide and mentor to you and to parents. So we help younger students select the right classes for their major, help them narrow down their career interests to choose a major, finding summer research programs or internships, shadowing experiences, which is a lot of what we're going to talk about today with our activities, because we want to help students build the strongest possible applicant profile. So when senior year rolls around, they have a competitive, they're a competitive candidate for even the most selective universities. And so for our rising seniors, we help guide them throughout the college application so nothing is missed and help them brainstorm the perfect college essays based on the hundreds of effective ones we've seen. And essentially, we do work one-on-one with students. We don't follow the typical like Monday through Friday 9 to 5 schedule because we're here nights, as you can tell, weekends, in every single time zone whenever it's convenient for the students. And we want to fill in every gap that might arise from the busy high school counselor who might not have time to help with every one of those items on for every single student on their list. And we're really unique because we do accept a limited number of students for each counselor. So we want to focus on our students' individual needs and work with med school applications and grad school applicants too. But our main focus is definitely BSMD, which is those selective direct medical programs. And one nice thing too about our company is we meet regularly to share advice about our students. So when you work with one of us, you're really working with all of us. And so if you'd like to work with one of us, you could definitely schedule a consultation call with us so that you can work with me or Kevin. And one way that you could definitely work with Kevin, as he'll explain, is our offer that we have just for you guys.
Yeah, so something we're excited about this summer is we have this personal statement package. Basically, we want to work with and help as many students as possible, and this is kind of a way to do that. If you're not unable to say afford a bigger package, or if you don't have the time, but basically what this is that you will work with one of your Moon Prep counselors on brainstorming, outlining a personal statement for the Common App. We'll do 2 rounds of revisions with you. So one of those will just be content and structure, as it says there, but essay organization, making sure at a high level the essay looks good, and then a final editing session, to kind of polish things up, make sure that they actually work before you submit them, and that. So I mean. Yeah, so that's the brainstorming package. It's all right there. Something to keep an eye on is that this offer does expire in a week or so, on August 5th. So if it's something that you're interested in, please do get in touch with us.
Perfect. Yes. All right. So let's get into the good stuff. Kevin, take it away.
Sure. So, okay. So there's been, as a lot of folks may be aware, if you're looking at applying to college, there's been a lot of changes in this past year, largely due to the pandemic. Um, something that did happen was that the California system, they removed SAT subject tests. They actually are not even, they removed SATs as part of their consideration overall, and not even optional for them. So, this sort of led to a cascading effect, and the College Board eventually decided that they are no longer sort of doing SAT subject tests. They're dropping it in order to reduce demands on students. So, as you're aware, with the pandemic, it's hard to find a testing center that may be open. Maybe your state just isn't open overall. So, even if a testing center was available, you can't get in there to take the test. It's impossible to prep, to find tutors and stuff like that. I mean, Lindsey, I mean, you can work with someone like Lindsey, but it's difficult right now, right? So, by eliminating that, it's sort of one less thing that students have to worry about during this time. And this is part of a larger trend overall, where not SATs, actually standardized tests are becoming sort of de-emphasized, because there is acknowledgement that not everybody has the same amount of access when it comes to prep for these exams, or even options to take these exams. So I guess in previous admission cycles, some schools like MIT, they required 2 subject tests, but they dropped this a while ago, right? It's not something they dropped this year; it's something they dropped previously. So this is a larger trend that's been happening, dropping exams and de-emphasizing them. Now, I think this will lead to an obvious question of, can you still submit your scores to school, right? If you've taken an SAT subject test already, and the answer, it kind of does depend school to school, but it is something that for schools that do take them, you might as well send them in, but it is something that you're gonna have to check school to school. So I guess with that said, now that there's been changes where SATs, standardized tests, are being a little bit de-emphasized, especially in the context of the pandemic. Where do I need to put my focus instead, especially if I'm looking at direct medical programs and I'm trying to give the universities a good sense of my academic profile, right? So that I think gets to that gets to a couple things. One, there are things like APs and IBs, which enable you to show that you have a strong academic foundation. That's also actually a factor that the College Board cited for reasons why that they're dropping the SAT subject tests. And I think maybe to yeah, I mean, and of course, as well, you can fill in that gap with activities. It's something we'll discuss a little bit later in the presentation. And so yeah, I mean, I guess from there, with that said, with these changes this past cycle, it's especially important to kind of show in other ways that you have knowledge, not knowledge, that you have knowledge of these subject areas, that you have experience in these subject areas, especially for competitive programs like BSMDs. So, I mean, I guess I'll hand this off to Lindsey because, as we've indicated, that this is not just a pandemic related issue. This is part of a larger trend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so like Kevin was saying, it definitely is kind of a larger trend. And even for like our selective BSMD programs, we are kind of seeing some go test optional, which was kind of unheard of even last year. And so these are some of the schools from last year of a 416 school sample. And this study looked at moderate to, selective schools. And only 3% required the SAT, ACT. Out of the ones that I've looked at, Florida still requires, and actually a lot of Georgia schools require too, but most other schools are test optional, including Ivy Leagues and things like that. And so we definitely had students get accepted to Ivy League schools like UPenn and things like that without submitting their test scores. And the reason why they were so successful is because they had a really awesome resume. They had some really unique parts of their resume. And so even though we kind of see that a lot of schools are either doing a test optional 1-year trial just to test it out, they haven't fully committed to the test optional train or even like a multi-year trial, we can kind of suspect that these numbers might get higher and higher of ones who move to like test optional permanently. And so as Kevin kind of mentioned, one thing to note is that Test optional does not mean that they're test free. And as you can see down there, only 8% of those 416 schools that were tested or that were surveyed are test free. And that means that, or test blind is what you might hear it as well. So even if you submit, they're not going to look at it. You can't even submit. Test optional, they'll still look at it if you submit, but that's kind of the important thing to remember. So especially for test free, like, you really want to take that time and effort with maybe AP exams or GPA or resume to help yourself stand out. But this is definitely a trend that we're going to see change, and it will change how I think students kind of prepare for their resumes, because instead of spending the summer studying for the SAT, maybe they can be pursuing other activities as well. So I think it's going to be a positive one. And one thing to note too is more the reason than ever to have a strong resume is there's a huge increase in applications last year. So overall, there was 10% more common applications submitted last year. And some schools saw like an insane amount. So for example, Harvard had 42% increase. Boston University had a 24% increase. So it was just an insane amount of numbers. And a lot of these schools, Harvard and Boston, did go test optional for the school overall. And so maybe students who did have a good GPA, who did have strong resumes, decided to shoot their shot without having to submit their scores, because maybe their scores were a little bit lower. So it's kind of, in some ways, helped even the playing field. But now students really do try harder to stand out in their resume. And you can kind of see here, these schools are crazy competitive. So a lot of these BSMD programs do have, and if those are those direct med programs, if we have anyone interested here in those, but a lot of these programs do have a 1%, 4.4% acceptance rate, and making them even more competitive than some of the most competitive schools. But a lot of these schools, like I mentioned, Harvard had 24% more applicants, and so it's gotten even more competitive because they're still accepting about the same number of students. So it is more and more competitive, and you can kind of see here the sheer number of applicants they get versus the number of seats. So spending the time here with us today and spending the time from a young age to set up their applicants is going to be more important than ever. Oh, and one thing to mention too before we go on, if you guys do have any questions, feel free to start sending them in the chat. We kind of had some commonly asked questions that parents always seem to ask us. If you have anything else that you want to talk about, we'd be more than happy to dive into it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that said, in this section, we're going to talk a little bit about some commonly asked questions that we do get about activities. The first one we have here, do I need to do sports? Or, you can insert any other activity type in there, right? Do I need to do the arts? Do I need to do a math Olympiad, right? But on that question, do I need to do sports or a specific activity type? The short answer is no. You don't have to. There is no cookie cutter set of activities that you need to have in order to become an appealing applicant, right? That is not necessarily the path you have to go down. I guess kind of related is something, an issue of, overall, like, what if you can't do, just a lot of activities, period, right? What if I need to work, I have family obligations, right? Maybe I have a family member who's ill, or maybe, I myself have health complications that prevent me from doing many activities, right? What if I have something that prevents me from doing activities? And, the short answer to that is fine. I think the thing is that two things to consider, right? Like, one, do what you can, right? And that is fine. There something that we'll talk about in this presentation is how to be creative about your activities and setting stuff up, regardless of what your circumstances are. And the second bit of this is that it's totally okay to explain, either through an essay, through an additional supplement, through your application materials, that, hey, I was working, right? Maybe my family's not well off and I have to work to help us pay rent, right? That is a real it's a real problem that people do have. So and that's not necessarily a negative. As some of you may be aware, diversity is something that does matter to a college admissions counselor, as they are a college admissions office, as they are filling their class. So just because you don't have the traditional stellar activities list because you have these obligations, there are ways that you can still share your own experience and make that look good to a college admissions office. I guess maybe then we should move on to some other commonly asked questions.
Yeah. And I'm going to add one thing too is like in the Common App activity list, you get 10 essays or 10 activities to talk about. You can totally put your family obligations in there. Like I had one girl who every single summer had to go down to Mexico to take care of her grandmother. And so that was one of her activities because that was something that instead of being able to attend a summer camp or volunteer, like in her hometown, she was in Mexico spending, 10 hours a day with her grandmother. So, and taking care of her. And she had health concerns that her grandmother, needed constant watching. And so that's something you can put there as well. It doesn't have to be the traditional essays or traditional activities. My goodness, I can't speak today. But let's talk a little bit about what type of activities are best. Because that seems to be a question we always get too. Like, which one should I do? Should I do DECA or should I do HOSA? Is tennis better than, a coding club or whatever it might be? And the short answer is there's no one best activity. The best type of activity is one that a student actually enjoys doing, that they're passionate about. So, you shouldn't necessarily prioritize one type of activity like that you think that they're going to want to see. We want to see students who actually like to do what they are spending their time doing. And it's always pretty obvious too, if it's something that the parents are making them do, or they're just doing because, they think that that's the ticket to success. It's definitely not the case. And so we want to have students who are able to stand out from the crowd, and they can do so by being passionate about their type of activities. One thing that I would recommend is think about the activities and what kind of story they're telling though. If you are doing like a bunch of, solo activities, maybe you do want to join something that has a team, just so then also you can be working with others and like kind of showcasing those skills or whatever it might be. But you don't necessarily have to feel like you must join a sport or you must join DECA because everyone else is. Kind of think about whatever you might be most passionate about. And the other big one that we are asked about all the time is, are virtual activities okay? And absolutely, because for a lot of students, that's pretty much all you can do. And so it doesn't need to be something that is virtual versus in person. Think about more of like what the impact is and what the impact is on you and your application, what you're able to do and what you're learning. If it's a super passive activity, whether it's in person or virtual, maybe that won't be as strong of a activity. But, if you're able to do some really fun activities where you're able to really make a difference, you're able to have some like deep interaction with things, those are the types of activities you should be prioritizing, regardless of whether or not it's virtual or in person. Okay. Now, a couple other commonly asked questions that we're always asked is, how many activities should I do? Have I done enough? What more should I add? And once again, we kind of suggest that you concentrate your energies on a few activities. So if you have 15 to 20 activities, there's no way that you're able to actually spend and dedicate a lot of time to each of those activities. One, you can't even spend the time in your activity list talking about all of them. You only have 10 spots. In your supplemental essays, you're not going to be able to be listing out all your activities. So you might as well concentrate your energies and really think more about how you can contribute more to that particular activity. Concentrate on the ones that you really like to do, and then focus your energy wisely. It's really about quality rather than quantity. And I forgot what you said earlier, Kevin, when we were talking about this slide.
Yeah, so I think quality over quantity is a good phrase. I mean, an easy one to remember is also depth over breadth. So it's better to see activities where you have dedicated time, dedicated passion. And I think I see a question that how many extracurriculars is too many. I mean, the thing is that you have a hard constraint. Lindsay, mentioned 10 because that's the Common App. That's the one that the most schools will go to. The Coalition app, which is maybe the next most popular, only allows for 8 activities. So, for those students who have 15 or 20, or let's say maybe a student has a bunch of activities and they're like, oh, I didn't volunteer somewhere, and they go to rush to volunteer for one day for 2 hours at 3 different places, that has no value. That's breadth, but that's not depth, right?
Mhm.
So that was, I guess, what I was getting at with that.
Yeah, completely agree. And so yeah, if you have the time to do more activities, that's great. But you don't want to overcommit, especially if you're doing AP exams, especially if you're just like being a normal teenager, enjoying life. Like, you want to be able to have the time to breathe and to develop as a human being. And you can't do that if you're constantly being shuttled from activity to activity. Um, and so honestly, like what I do suggest to like younger students, especially freshmen, is like, explore some different clubs. Like if you have never tried robotics and you're like, maybe it was fun, go for it. If you have never done tennis, or you want to try coding, or you want to try whatever activity might be, debate, speech, try them out. And, you don't have to continue those for all 4 years if it just doesn't click for you. So, find the ones that you are passionate about and pursue those as well. But, freshman, sophomore year, explore, get some insights into what kind of things you're interested in, what kind of classes you like, and you can kind of go from there. All
I
right.
guess I do want to build on Lindsay's point, and to kind of maybe address a little bit more detail. I think what Angela's question, maybe a little bit what Vijay's question is. So you want to do it. It's good to set things up in that way because, um, we're not discouraging you from going out and helping your friend with a volunteer activity that may only be a one-off, right? That's not what we're saying necessarily. That's not worth it because it's not helping your college application. It's just that by the time you're a junior and senior, right, and you're really serious into this process, when we look at your activities, we hope to see maybe 2 or 3 areas where there's developed interest over time, right? So maybe in the example student she gave, she did that maybe if they did the robotics club and they liked it, maybe they took a couple of classes related to robotics that next summer, right? And maybe they became a member of a local chapter of a community group dedicated to technology in their junior year, right? So that activity became a theme as part of their activities list. Are there 2 or 3 major areas where this person's really developed, right? So it's not that you can't do other things. It's not that we're discouraging you from pursuing whatever you're passionate about. It's just that are there, when you're a junior and a senior, are there at least a couple different activities or activity areas where you've developed the interest over time? That's what we're getting at.
Definitely. Perfect. Um, okay. And then next kind of commonly asked question is, do I need to be a leader in every club, or how much leadership is good leadership? And kind of continuing off of what we just spent quite a bit of time talking about is, if you're a leader in every single club, like there's no way you're going to be effective because it has a lot of responsibility. So you don't need to be the leader in every single club. You don't need to be the president of DECA and of HOSA and have be the founder of your own club and a nonprofit. There's just not enough hours in the day. And so, you absolutely should be a leader, can be a leader if it's a tennis captain or whatever it might be. Try and focus on that too. But, you don't necessarily have to feel pressured to be a leader in every single club. Do you have anything you want to add to that, Kevin?
Yeah, no, I guess along that vein, related to, if you spent time to something and you're passionate about it, it's okay if you're not a leader, right? That's the first thing, right? Being a member of something for 3 years and spending a lot of time in it and having different types of accomplishments other than leadership ones are still impressive. And the second thing is that there's more than one way to demonstrate leadership besides being the president of something
Yes.
or founding a new club or organization. So, that's the other thing to keep in mind. If you're taking a lot of responsibility for something, right? So maybe you're not the president of a club, but maybe you're in charge of running a bunch of events, right? That's still leadership. So, leadership is something that's very amorphous, and you don't have to be, I guess, a traditional leader in every club in order for your activities list to be impressive.
Definitely.
Okay, great. So, with that framework for how to think of maybe activities in mind, kind of the next question your next question that some of you watching may be asking is, okay, how do I boost my resume, or just more broadly my activities, right? I think that's something that's on a lot of people's mind, especially right now with the coronavirus quarantine. And I think a lot of folks are wondering, how do I keep building my resume? How do I keep building my activities list in a time where we're not having extracurricular competitions, or at least at the very least not at the same rate that we did pre-pandemic, right? Um, and even the ones that do exist, they are in a very different format. Everything's going virtual, right? So, if that's you and you're wondering how can I do that, it's the time to take a little bit of time to reflect and maybe think about what are ways I can explore to add activities that are virtual, right? Or though don't require um, competitions that are in person, right? In order for me to stand out or to enjoy them fully, right? So, you know, uh, one idea is, to reach out to local organizations. So whether that's, local nonprofits, I think in the slide, examples of a food drive or a fundraiser, right? That could be other types of community organizations as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be a traditional nonprofit, but reaching out to just organizations in your area, right, is a good way to start. And another way that can manifest itself is through reaching out to online businesses for internships. Seeing if folks will let you shadow, seeing if folks will let you just help out on the back end of their business, right? So there's a lot of administrative work that still needs to get done at every single business that an intern can help out with, right? Um, and I mean, on that idea of logistical support, you can also help, I guess, nonprofits that way too, right? Like maybe your local food bank would really appreciate if you could reach out to folks on social media to help them with a push to get certain types of foods or a push to get donations, right? So that's all stuff that you can do from your home. Other ways you could think about sort of being to working from home is something that's a little bit more self-starting. So in the example we have here, self-publishing a book, starting a website or a blog, that's something that, or finding an online community, right, of maybe writers that will willing to help you, willing to publish your stuff, right? Um, there's a lot of folks willing to publish your stuff if you're willing to write. So that's another way to fill out your activities in our remote world. The one thing I think we do want to warn against, given even with the pressure to find activities that you can do virtually, is don't necessarily come across as you're desperately filling your resume with just anything that you come across, right? This builds off a theme from our last or sort of discussion of the questions before, right? Where um, doing spending 30 minutes doing a social media push for like 5 different community organizations, right? It creates the same type of problem that we discussed before of doing a bunch of one-off activities, right? And um, colleges can kind of tell, just having been in admissions, like we can tell that's what's happening. You're not actually committed to this activity.
Mhm.
And the thing is too is that colleges don't want cookie cutter applicants. So um, if you're just thinking in terms of check boxes, right? How can I fill in another volunteer activity or fill in maybe a school organization, right? You may come across as just a cookie cutter applicant, and that's not what colleges want. They want individuals with distinct passions and interests. And maybe a way to think of right now is trying to find your own distinct passions and a way to self-start and to be involved with them. So I guess sort of maybe to offer a pro tip, right? If you feel your activities are a little lacking, let's say you're someone who's done model at UN since middle school, it's something that you are really good at, you're really passionate about international relations. Well, what's something you can do right now from your home? You can maybe self-publish a book or a guide, right, for newbies into Model UN, right? Or just maybe some of your providing sort of just insight on how to navigate their first conference, how to do research on different what's going on with international governmental organizations, right? So you can provide that guide for others. something that'll look impressive on your resume because it's you were a self-starter who published your own book. It's something that adds depth to that Model UN activity, right? Sort of creates that as a theme. Um, and it ties, into something that you're clearly passionate about, and something that it takes a lot of passion to to write something independently and to publish it on your own, right? So, that could be an example if you're like a Model UN person of how you make that work. I think Lindsey, you have an example too of someone who's into robotics, or one of your students, right?
Yeah. So I have a student who does robotics, and this is actually a good kind of answer to Vijay's question about
Mm,
like what volunteer opportunities, because his major hope is like computer science, and so he really loves robotics. He's been doing coding for a long time. He does like scratch programming. And so for him, what his volunteer opportunity was, him and his friends like started an organization where they teach free coding classes to students who wouldn't be able to afford it otherwise. And so it's related to his future career. He's able to have impact on others, and he's working with his friends to make this happen. Um, and so that's like kind of something simple he's been doing. And then what Kevin was talking about before with writing a book, he's also, going to write a book, like a little guide on how, like with 6 or 7 steps and like little what's it called? Example projects to work on for coding as well, so that he can start practicing that and start to stand out as well. And he's going to publish this book. And his plan also is to once again donate it to like places where they couldn't afford the coding classes otherwise, and so that students who maybe wouldn't be able to get exposure because their school doesn't have this type of curriculum are able to learn it. And so that's what I would like say too, to focus on some of these activities is like, as Kevin was saying, what does it say about like the overall story of your application? It's not just random things. And of course, like if you have random interests, that's totally fine. But don't just, be doing things to do things. He kind of had a clear purpose and kind of was thinking about the story, which is, what worked best for him. Okay. So some other things kind of on the same note about how you can start to gain some experiences just within like your future major choice. College is expensive, so you want to have like a clear idea. You want to have not a set in stone idea, but a pretty clear idea maybe of what you might want to study or what type of career you might be interested in. And it's really hard to know if we're just basing it off of like movies or books or like what our parents do or something like that. So we really do encourage students to get some, as much of hands-on opportunities as possible. And so I see we have a question about medical field activities. Web Shadowers is actually a virtual platform where students get to shadow, watch videos of doctors from different specialties. And so this is a really great one too, because, they've got a lot of different specialties out there that you would never probably find. Like I remember one that I saw was like a food medicine doctor. I didn't even know that was a thing, but you can like listen to their presentation and learn a little bit more about them. And so, it's of course very different from in-person shadowing, but it's a very good opportunity because you get to see a wider variety of different things and possibly like get some ideas about what you might want to do in the future. So Web Shadows is of course more doctor focused, but there's also, you can find dental shadowing and things like that too. The Forage, I think is how it's pronounced. They have a wide variety of different digital opportunities too. And so their stuff is more like financial, like Citibank has like a little shadowing opportunity that you can pursue. So these can just be really helpful too when you're writing like your wide major essay, because then you have some knowledge about what the field actually is. You can have a reason pointing to like why you want to pursue this particular career. And so that's definitely something we'd recommend students to spend some time doing. And depending on the COVID situation, you can even reach out to local companies. Some of them will let you shadow. And maybe like if they like you, you can start an internship there even too. Like if you prove yourself, if you ask them good questions, like, while you're there, you ask them if you can help out with anything. kind of get in the back door that way, is definitely something that you could try to do to once again get some good experiences. So it could be local, it could be even further away too, because of COVID times. A lot of companies are still virtual, but it can be a great way just to get some different experiences, and start to understand a little bit more for yourself, about what kind of field you might want to pursue.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. So I guess the other thing is as well. So beyond these virtual professional opportunities, beyond sort of being a self-starter, in the context of COVID, because sometimes those opportunities, do have a bit of a high bar for entry because maybe you don't know anybody, right, in those fields. Or maybe it's just you know yourself and you need something a bit more structured, more structured way to kind of get more activities, right? Great ways to fill out the rest of your resume as well. You can roll. I mean, I say roll a virtual or in-person college classes. Look to your area. What you have a local university or community college that may offer you the opportunity to enroll in their courses and to build out your resume to make your academic achievement look a little bit more impressive. um, Maybe you can try to find if you're doing an existing activity. So maybe, for example, if you're doing an internship or a job somewhere already, right? But maybe COVID, either A, continue doing it, or B, if COVID screwed this up, hey, can I do this activity I have been doing remote, right? Trying to figure out something that way. Um, so continuing maintaining your activities, obviously. Another great opportunity is joining a summer enrichment program. It's something that's very structured, and because right now with what we're dealing with COVID, a lot of them are going virtual. So thinking about that, right? Think about, well, what academic area am I interested in, right? If I'm interested in business, there's a lot of programs geared towards business, and if you apply to a business school in the future, it'll look impressive on you. There's like summer at Stern, right? As an example of one. It's NYU Stern School of Business. Depending on what the COVID situation looks like this year, next year, right? I don't want to predict, but if we're in person, you get to go to New York and have that experience. If we're not, you still get to learn from top practitioners from a great business school, right? For a lot of our folks who are more like pre-med and the BSMD track, like Columbia University, they have like a science honors program for students in the region, right? To take science courses through Columbia, which is a fantastic opportunity, will make you look great as far as your BSMD application, right? So if you need something a little bit more structured, summer programs are a great opportunity. Uh, I think another opportunity maybe we'll talk about next is potentially doing an independent research project.
Yeah, sorry.
No worries.
I'm gonna go back actually because I see Sue had a question about like what kind of local company. So before we get kind of too far away from that, it can be any type of local company. Like if it should be within the field that you're interested in pursuing. So if like you want to be doing financial, like something with like the stock market, doing like a company that does that kind of thing. If you are wanting to work for a nonprofit, try and shadow there. So you can start to understand what the field is. If you want to be a chiropractor, shadow a chiropractor. So it doesn't really matter what it is, but any type of company, once again, not some random company. You have no interest in being a dentist, you shouldn't go shadow a dentist. Kind of think about, once again, that story that you're interested in telling. Um, and I see that we had another question about like college classes. So kind of going off of what you're just talking about, Kevin. Um, if the person who did them could talk about if they got credit for them, because if you take a college class like on Coursera or something, it'll show up kind of in a different place than if you didn't get credit. But there's definitely a spot in the resume or in that your class schedule or your classes on the Common App where you can add in if you got credit for it. You can put what college it is. It'll be in your transcript. It'll be official. But if it's more of like a Coursera, you just took it for free and kind of like audited the course, you could put that under an activity. It could be one of your 10 activities if you'd like to.
Yeah, sorry, like did lose the audio for a minute, so if I'm overlapping a point, I do apologize. But on the note of like Coursera, also edX, right, opportunities like that.
Mhm.
The nice thing about a lot of those courses is that in the STEM fields, especially, there oftentimes is some sort of end product, whether that's like a research paper or a technical thing that you made. So, I mean, that that works as an activity. Maybe you can link to it, right? So that in a supplement or in an optional thing that you send to a college, right? So um, don't dismiss those opportunities, because you will have like oftentimes a finished product that you can show to people as part of a
Mhm.
portfolio.
Definitely. Yeah. Cool. All right. Let's talk about something else that we've talked about a lot before too, which is an independent research project. And I see that someone wanted ideas for medical field activities. This would be great, especially during COVID era. A lot of our students have been pursuing independent research projects. It's a great way for them to get some research experience and hopefully get published as well. Um, and so the goal for this is to help them get recognized as like a young emerging scientist. Um, and ultimately, it can be within any field that you might be interested in. For example, I'm working with like a student whose brother has autism, and so she's writing her research paper on a communication method that's not well researched still. It's kind of controversial. So that's what her paper's on, because it's something that kind of hits close to home for her. She wants to be studying this in the future. And so it's a way for her to demonstrate interest in this topic as well. Um, Another student is a pre-dental student and had done a paper like for school on like dental fear. And so that was kind of something that was interesting to him. And so he's doing it like if smoking increases like dental fear essentially. And like, did a survey of a lot of different people and kind of things like that. And so I've had students do a wide variety of different things. And so ultimately, it doesn't matter what it is as long as it's something that's interesting to the student. Um, and so we do have a lot of tips on like, how to get started with this as well, but I'll let Kevin explain that one.
Sure. So the first place to start, right, is top line there, make a list of your future career interests. That's for an obvious reason, right? Whatever, your research project should be, it's slightly better if it's related to, right, the type of college or graduate programs you apply to and your future career. So that, that's why that's the starting point. Um, Once you have that, documenting potential research topics related to your interests, and to get, I guess, to provide folks a little more clarity for what that means, you think about what research is happening in that field. So if you are someone's into tech, and that's your professional interest, what are different research areas in tech? Well, one would be artificial intelligence, right? And maybe you can think about, well, what are ways we can apply artificial intelligence, maybe in urban planning or healthcare or somewhere else, right? If you're someone interested in healthcare, which a lot of our students are, well, okay, what's your potential specialization? That's the first, your future career interest, right? Okay, well, you're interested in oncology. Well, what research on cancer therapies are being done, right? So that's potential research topics related to your interests. Once you have that, you can look at different journals, what's being studied in that specialization. You can look at which local universities professors are working on those areas, right? And so typically, whatever sort of the local research universities are in your area, if you go to the department that's related to the research area you're interested in, oftentimes either in the professor's bio or for the department itself, they'll list like what research is happening. So once you've identified some alignment there, right? I'd recommend like as it says, reaching out to faculty members whose research interests, align with yours, right? Or who the research they're doing is just really interesting to you, right? When you reach out to them, include your activities resume, so they know who you are, right? And make sure when you contact them that you kind of explain to them that there is alignment there and explain why you're interested in this area, right? Um, so that they can see you as a potential research collaborator. So I mean,
Definitely.
yeah. So I mean, that's a good place to get started. I guess on this process, maybe we should talk about sourcing, sort of where places to look as you get started. So the sources we got here are very medically focused, as far as potential areas to identify ongoing research in the medical field. So PubMed, which is obviously a great tool. For a variety of subjects, there are PubMed Central, so you can find things without paywalls. Any CDC we list here, but any government agency that's doing health research. So if you find something on NIH website as well, it's just as valid, right? It's a public library of science, so there's peer-reviewed articles for free. for more general resources, here we have Google Scholar because it's easy. It's an easy way to kind of get started to find out what journals are publishing what, right? A very easy way to get started. There's also the directory open access journals, so you can find stuff that isn't paywalled as well. And I'd also, whatever your local resources are at your local library, at your school. So, for example, some schools or libraries will have provide their patrons or students access to just general research databases like JSTOR. So that's another way to get going as well, is just to reach out to your local librarian or local teachers, right, to figure out what you have access to from a research standpoint.
Definitely. Yeah, and some of these resources too, like, even if you aren't like a science major, you could be doing a paper if you're a psychology or a business, major, whatever it might be. You could still be doing these types of, research projects. It would obviously just be very differently focused. And some of these resources could still help you kind of in that process too. But in general, as you can kind of see here, tons of different topics can be accepted to like research journals. And so if you like do a quick Google search, you'll find a lot of past issues of scientific journals. And so definitely read through the past issues of scientific journals of like the publication you're targeting. You might want to start listing out which topics could be done independently at home, like no lab needed, if you're doing like a more of a science activity. And then another thing you might want to do is like list the topics that interest you most, kind of what Kevin was talking about a couple slides ago about thinking about your career interests. If you are doing it independently, you might want to like talk to a science teacher at your school or an econ teacher, whatever kind of topic you're working on. And they can maybe even help you kind of come up with an idea, talk about how you can tweak any current research, improve upon it, whatever it might be, address it from a whole nother angle. And one thing to note too is that many publications do allow like something that's a little untraditional as well. So it could be an interview, a review of current research, or even like a short article. And so this can be like a good way for students to get started. One thing to note too, if you want it to get published, and because another thing that we always do recommend is try and, see things to the end. Don't just start 8 projects, but try and do the research paper and ultimately get it published as well. This can take a lot of time. So if you are a student, maybe like a rising junior, you might think that you have a lot of time, but it could take 3 to 6 months to get the paper published. And so by starting this process early, getting it done over the summer as much as possible is going to really help you on that process too. And so like I kind of already mentioned, there are a lot of different types of articles you could be doing. And so you don't necessarily have to feel like you are constricted to just one type of thing. So just look at the publication that you're targeting and see what types of things you can really be being able to write about, whatever it might be.
Yeah, no, I mean, great advice. So great advice there. So I guess on the topic that Lindsey mentioned of seeing things through to the end, right? How you take your research project to the next level and kind of see things through to the end, right? So, I mean, there's a great list here. The point is not necessarily that you have to do every single one of these. That's not what we're advocating for, but just creating at least an endpoint where there is something that you've ultimately have created and can share, right, with this research that you've done. So obviously the best, the strongest way to do this is to get published somewhere and somewhere good. But if you can't do that, you can self-publish. You can hold a workshop or online course. You can start a podcast on the subject. You can run an informational campaign. You're launching a YouTube channel about it, right? There's also, I think, other sort of practical ways we have here, like filing a patent, right? Or sort of turning your research into something actionable. I think someone asked a question about business, right? If you're like in business and tech, you can have this research lead to something actionable, right? Whether it's something with just a small business you try and experiment with, or something that you've coded and you just publish to GitHub, right? So whatever way you have to communicate your research is good. And if it's possible, you can create something, create something out of it beyond just research. That's great too, right? Whether it's an end product, something coded, or something business wise you started. So these are just some examples, but it's just a general idea of getting something that you've created that takes your research project to the next level.
Yeah. And I see there was a question about are there any journals that accept reviews? There are, but I don't know them off the top of my head. So that would require a little bit of looking online to see which ones accept, one, high schoolers, and two, accept reviews. But unfortunately, I can't think of their names off the top of my head. Okay. So here, let's talk a little bit about just a student that kind of had an interesting, different approach to it. And so one MoonPrep student was actually active in the robotics club. And so that was kind of the first layer of his activity. And then he noticed that during COVID, one of his the local dentist essentially had a shortage of dental shields and had to close the practice because they couldn't, get the necessary safety equipment in order to see patients. And so this student, what admissions officers really like to see is students who are seeing a problem and then solving that problem within their community too. And so no one made him do this, but what he did was he created used his 3D printing experience and designed and printed dental shields so that he could be delivering it to the dental office. They could still be seeing patients throughout the COVID pandemic. And so something that we really suggest that they do as well is, not add that other layer. And so for him, what he did was also he did research paper on different cost-effective materials he found. And so obviously this isn't super scientific. He's not studying C. elegans or, curing a disease or, proposing a new treatment for COVID or anything. This was a very, thing that he could do in his living room. Not everyone will be able to 3D print, but everyone could kind of come up with a topic that they could very conceivably do in their living room. They wouldn't need to have a lab. They wouldn't need to have a ton of outside knowledge besides those report or those sources that we talked about earlier. And so that's kind of the important thing to think about too, as you're coming up with a topic is, what's one thing that is interesting to me that is within the field. If it is business, maybe you're studying, some kind of trend that you might be seeing within the certain field. If it's something with independent business owners or with a certain product, whatever it might be, you could be doing that. If it's within more science, it could be, something about simple, kind of compost, I can't say the word, things that can be composted. You know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
But yeah, things like that I've had students do. So you can have a wide variety of different things. I had one student who had lead poisoning. And I think actually, yeah, I'll switch to my top 3 most memorable activities. She's student number 2. So actually what she did, if you're taking your AP research and seminar courses, this can be actually a great start for you as well because you have a kind of a structured way to get going. And so that's actually how her paper got started. Is she discovered she had lead poisoning, and then did some detective work to figure out how she had lead poisoning. And so for this student, she discovered she tested her water, she tested the paint, and she finally did some research and found out that it's actually from a commonly used spice. And so she did her research paper on this, and her mom had come up with kind of a homeopathic method to cure the lead poisoning, got her lead poisoning or her lead levels back to the normal level. But we didn't want her activity just to stop there with her research paper for the AP research course. So we actually helped her get it published. And she took it to the next level. So actually what she did was, because she knew it was a commonly used spice, she did some presentations in her community at some events to spread awareness about the lead poisoning as well. And 3 other kids in her neighborhood figured out that they also had lead poisoning from using this spice. So they took advantage of her homeopathic cure. Their levels were also back to normal. And then kind of that next level that she then added to it, even though she had no previous coding experience, she actually created an app, entered it into the Lenovo app contest, and won first place for in health sciences for this. She was recognized as the first place winner. And once again, it kind of spread awareness about lead poisoning and her cure as well. So something really simple, but she constantly took it to the next level, and really was able to continually spread her impact from herself to like her community to like, nationwide or further. So that's exactly what students should be doing, is kind of thinking about how we can always be taking it one step further. I'm going to jump back to student one, who also was like another mm, um, memorable activity. So this was another MoonPrep student, and he was really into rock climbing. And so he noticed that when he went like rock climbing, that the ropes would just get thrown away for like, safety reasons after a while. And so we asked them if like he could get it donated to, if they would donate them to him rather than throw them away. And he actually started to create like dog leashes out of those recycled climbing ropes because he really loved animals as well. And so he donates all of his profits to the local animal shelter. And even though this kid was a direct med student, he was a medical school student, like, it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with med school, but that's totally fine because he was really passionate about both of these activities, and it was a way for him to really impact his community as well. And then I have student number 3, and she's a really interesting student. She focuses really heavily on like anti-vaping, and does a lot of like presentations in her local community. She goes to school. She started like an anti-vaping club and things like that, just kind of spreading the awareness and the awareness about the dangers of vaping. And so not only does she like lead workshops, but she's also like, gone as far as like going in front of like the state Senate and kind of talking about the rules, kind of talking about how the regulations need to be changed. She's interviewed like the governor. She's written articles that have been published, in some really great magazines and like online publications. And so, that's something that she constantly is doing. Even though most of her activities are focused around this anti-vaping campaign, that's totally fine because she does it really deeply, and has done, internships and just done a lot of work with this. And so that's totally fine because she's totally narrowly focused, but she's very heavily focused in it as well. And so ultimately, I think that's what helps her stand out too, because she does so many different things with this and is really having a big impact in her community. I see that someone asked about an app contest. It was like Lenovo. I think that's like a phone brand.
Technical company. They make laptops as well.
Laptops, that's what it is.
Yep.
It was, let's see if I can find it. It's the Lenovo App Innovator Program, I think. I can send it in the chat too, but that's essentially what it was. And yeah, she entered that last year, 2 years ago, and won that as well. Yeah, I'll have Kevin explain his top 3 memorable goodies.
Sure. So there's 2 themes here. Like, one is continuing to take things to the next level, and the second one is just how to self-start, right? And what is just a difficult time, right, with the pandemic environment. So student 1, I like this example because she did an established volunteer activity at her school, right? They had a sort of sister school program with a school in Tibet, and like once a year they do a fundraiser to send money to the school. And as she became part of this activity, she wanted to expand the program, so she did additional fundraisers. Okay, well, what can we do next? So they actually planned a trip out to the school, and they did like workshops, with student teachers. And then when they went out there, they discovered that like the facilities aren't great, and one of the things that the school staff wanted to do was to have like a section of their library where they could have like an English corner, right? Because that English language instruction was something they were trying to expand. So what the thing she did was that she's okay, well, we're gonna we're gonna come up with the money for this English corner, right? This is a server project that she worked with the school staff on, and so went to local organizations to pick up books, tried to fundraise money to actually expand the library. And so by the time she graduated, right, this is a 3 or 4 year journey. There is obviously this program that exists in the school has been heavily expanded, right? They have a literally a built out English corner to the library, just because she kept at the activity and seeing like, well, what else can I do with this activity? What else can I do with this activity? What else can I do with this activity? Right? So it's something that creating like a an infrastructure project at a school in Tibet is not something I think most freshmen or sophomores in high school would imagine themselves getting involved in. But just by keeping at an activity, even if it's already established, and thinking, how can I take this to the next level? It's something that can get you there. And it helped with her because she was applying to a lot of schools that were really into the whole like international relations thing. So she got into like all her programs, and it was something that like, or all the top programs she wanted to get into, and it's something that all of them mentioned was that, like, they were really excited about this. I guess the second student, this was something that is just, you're trying to do something during COVID. And so she founded an online education company. It was something that her and basically a friend of hers and another friend who was tech savvy, they tried to create like a little learning community because they were at like an international school that had like a network of international schools. And so they were just, they create some education videos, sort of some chat boards where folks can connect with each other and help each other out. And it got so many users because folks are, as you might expect, having difficulties with remote learning and are looking for online resources that they can help themselves out with. So it grew so much that she ended up sort of founding her own education company, and now they do like live tutoring, and she has employees, and she's there's a whole process of her like trying to figure out like, how do I get myself like legally registered? How do I pay taxes? Stuff like that, right? Which is a whole journey for her. And that was I thought an interesting way to, something that you just pursue an interest, right? That you have during COVID, and it's just like connecting people to help each other with online school. That was her thing she was trying to thing with, and it took off on its own and grew, right? And then the last student is in very similar vein, right? Where they were just looking for ways to like learn on their own, right? And so they decided they're technically inclined, and they wanted to learn how to code for an app, right? And well, what is an app that could provide need during this pandemic? And for them, it was like, okay, a COVID tracker app. How can I track cases in my state? This is something that they started right when the pandemic began, right? And that was a major need the first few months. So yeah, I mean, they learned a lot of coding. They reached out to family friends to sort of learn more coding, right? They took some Coursera courses, something we mentioned earlier. And they created this app, and then they did a lot of work to get it published on the App Store. It got taken down, unfortunately, because they're cracking down on COVID misinformation. So you have to be like a legally registered company. But there's a lot they learned during the process. They have their stuff published online via GitHub. So there's a lot that they're going to be able to, references that they have now, stuff they're going to be able to write about in their essays, stuff that they physically can send to the university, even though it's no longer in the App Store. So I mean, I thought that was just a neat little thing of someone doing the whole Coursera self learning route, right? So those are the ones that I thought were memorable and may provide some insight to our students or any students watching this webinar.
All right. So we're winding down. So if anyone has any last minute questions, please send them on in to us. But we're going to leave you with some resources, at least while you guys maybe are thinking of some questions that you can talk to us about. But just a reminder, if you are a rising senior and you have not started your personal statement, now is the time to start it. And so we do have our $199 personal statement offer that expires next week. And so it has 2 brainstorming calls, 2 rounds of edits, or I guess 1 brainstorming call and then 1 summary call as well. So you get 2 calls with your counselor and 2 rounds of edits. So by the end, you'll have like a really great version of your personal statement to get it started on. So that can be just like a great way to get started in general. We also have a ton of resources. So, no matter what year you are in high school, if it's, your junior, freshman, senior, or beyond, we have a lot of resources to help you as well. So you can go to our website, moonprep.com/resources. We also have a lot of webinars coming up. Some that we're going to be editing essays live, where we're going to have like an Ask Me Anything session. So if like you go and think of more questions that you don't ask today, we can answer them there. But a lot of great resources for you as well. We can stop and answer these questions as we pause on this screen. So this one says, does taking AP courses impact college admission? I'll let you handle that one, Kevin.
Sure. So, I mean, the short answer is yes, but it's not like a checkbox, right? So with a competitive program, you're a competitive university, right? They want to see that you're academically qualified, that you can handle the university, but that obviously they're comparing you to other applicants, right? And what they're
Mhm.
more concerned about is overall academic strength, right? APs is arguably the most common way to show that, right? You can kind of see it because most universities will have a policy, right, where if you score high enough in the AP exam, you can skip out in certain classes or get college credit for them, right? But you don't have to necessarily show it through APs. For example, some students watching or students that we have, they do an IB degree, so they're taking a lot of IB courses or demonstrating their academic strength that way. But yes, academic strength is a factor, right? So to maybe give you another way to think about it, right? So I have two students, both of them have a 3.8 GPA, right? One of them has a bunch of AP courses, and one of them just has some regular courses and maybe a couple of honors courses. The student with the APs comes out ahead, right? Because they have a stronger academic background. Just they've gotten that GPA with on more difficult courses, right? That speaks more to academic performance. So it does impact things, but if you're like someone who's getting an IB degree, or if you have other ways that you show an academic strength, because maybe your high school doesn't have many AP classes, so you've taken the couple that they've had, maybe something you can do is figure out, or maybe you take some courses at your local community college to kind of show the academic strength as well. So there's multiple ways to show academic strength. AP is just one of them, but it is the most common way to show it. So if you have the opportunity to take APs, I do recommend it.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree. Um, and I guess the important thing too is like, you don't have to necessarily worry about taking every single AP class in your school. If you are planning on being an English major or like journalism or something along those lines, do you need to take AP biology? If you like it, go ahead, but you don't have to feel obligated just because every single person is taking it to also take it. If you're more of a STEM student as well, if a push doesn't fit really within your career goals, you won't need it for college anyway. It's okay to also skip that. You still want to take a rigorous course load, but you don't necessarily have to feel like every single class must be AP, because
Yeah.
you want to save time for extracurriculars and things
Yeah.
like that too.
So, Lindsay, I guess a question related to that, right, is so because a lot of our students and folks watching our webinars are prospective BSMD students. What are some, I guess, APs you would encourage them to prioritize if they are going on that BSMD track?
That's a great question. So, I mean, bio and chem are probably like the top ones to consider. And sometimes it just doesn't work within the schedule of the students where they can only take bio or only take chem. I just had like a new call with a client or a potential new client who was, really concerned that she wasn't able to fit AP chem into her schedule. And I mean, ultimately that's okay because there's only so many hours in the day. She just couldn't get it in. So not to stress too much about it. Um, but AP Chem, AP Bio, AP Physics, those are and AP Calc are kind of the top ones to really make sure you try and get in. But once again, it doesn't have to all work out, because sometimes it's just the natural progression in your school of what's required that you take and when you can take things. Some schools won't allow students to start taking APs until their sophomore year, their junior year even, or they can only take one freshman year, one sophomore year, two junior year, and whatever senior year. And so there's just not a lot of time to be able to fit all that stuff in. And so that's like the important thing to remember too, is like, your school will also send in a report about what was available to you. So those types of the admissions officers will know what was available to you at your school, what kind of natural progression you had to follow. If you had to take AP Human Geography and you couldn't take AP Chem because of whatever reason. So, that's the important thing to remember. So, APUSH is always the one. AP US History is always the example I use, just because it's a really time-consuming class, of one that you might not necessarily need to take. And honestly, it probably doesn't fit within your career goals. So if you just don't have time for it, it's okay. Concentrate that energy you would have spent on APs, like a non-STEM AP course, on your extracurriculars instead. And so same kind of thing. No matter what your major is, kind of think about how it would fit within your path too. Save your energy for the more important things. Cool. Anything you want to add to that, Kevin?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. And it's, you know, I think the only other thing, and I discussed it earlier, but I'll emphasize it again. We oftentimes work with highly motivated kids looking to apply to BSMD, right? Looking to go to med school someday. And, if you're in that boat and you've kind of hit the ceiling on what your school offers, which because maybe you're really good at math or physical sciences, and you've taken the one AP they offer right in that area. I'd give a look at local universities and community college, because that's
Mm,
like a theme of the rest of the presentation. That's showing your own initiative to go above and beyond, and I think that also does leave a positive impression as well.
great point. Cool. So yeah, here's some of our upcoming webinars. Um, and if anyone else has any questions, feel free to keep answering them in. We'll be on for the next couple minutes for sure as we kind of go through the rest of this. But you can also set up a call to work with us on anything, not just like the personal statement offer. You can do hourly packages where we work on everything, just interview prep, just help on resume building, kind of whatever you need help with, we'll be there. And our one last slide too is, we want to thank you all for spending your Thursday night with us. You've been with us for more than an hour, and we really appreciate it. And so, of course, our goal for you is to leave this webinar like feeling like you learned something and a little bit more confident about the college admissions process. And so we'd love to hear how we did. So we'll send out like a recording to everyone who signed up for this webinar, and like everyone on our mailing list as well. And you can just reply to that email with any feedback you have. If it's positive, we'd love for you to leave us like a Facebook review. If you have something you'd like us to improve on, you can reply to that email as well. And then we would love to hear what we could do better as well. And if you give us feedback, if it's via email or on our Facebook review, I can put that on our on the chat as well. Then we'll send you like a little thank you freebie as well, so that you can be, thank you for your time and for hanging out with us for a full hour as well. But I think that we have all of the questions. If anyone has anything last minute, send it in now or forever hold your peace.
Yeah, I guess while folks are making that last consideration for questions, um, something I think that may have come across as a theme. We tried to provide you guys examples of ways you can self-start and trying to create your own opportunities, given the limitations that COVID has put upon us. But if you do sign up with us, it's something that we do help students out with a lot, right? If you're BSMD, finding virtual shadowing opportunities, that's something that we help students with, right? I've worked with students before on figuring out, if they're technical, right? I gave the example of COVID Tracker app, like how can I get something published online, right, via public Tableau dashboard or on GitHub, so that someone can access it and see that like I actually learned all these things and did these things independently. So something that MoonPrep counselors do work with their students is trying to figure out a way to get around these limitations and do these self-starting activities. So that's something that we definitely work with our students with, and we can definitely help you with. But at the very least, you have this webinar, so you have some examples maybe to get your inspiration going.
Yeah, great point. Well, I think that's all the questions. I don't think we missed any. Let me check on my phone again. But I think that's everything. What activities can be relevant for the business career? So honestly, once again, kind of anything. One thing to kind of think about is like maybe you are reaching out to like local businesses or local nonprofits and like kind of asking them if you can be like a business administrative, you know, intern or something like that. There's this club called Beta Bowl, or not a club, a summer enrichment program called Beta Bowl. You might have seen them on like our newsletter. If you're on our newsletter, they have a lot of summer courses too that kind of teach students how to run their own business. So if you're more of like the entrepreneurial spirit, that can be a great way to get started as well. And something else that you can be doing too is honestly, you could be starting your own business, even if it's like, you're babysitting or you're mowing lawns or something like that, doing anything that kind of requires you to be managing other people and you're ultimately getting paid for it as well. That can be a lot of different ways that you can be getting business activity.
Yeah, no, those are some great ones. And for folks, I mean, if you're a rising senior, it's a little bit too late. But if you're not a rising senior, it's freshman, sophomore, junior, There are a lot of summer programs dedicated specifically to business students, business opportunities. One I mentioned earlier was Summer at Stern, which is through NYU. I think Babson College, which is like a college that specializes in just business, and they're highly ranked in it. They have a summer program as well. And there's just lots of, I mean, you could, another way is to reach out to your local university, right? Or to look on their website, see if they have classes geared towards high schoolers or a summer program you can partake in and potentially help out with. The same, I guess, also applies. We gave the spiel about research, right? Is that there is business research as well. So if that's something you're interested in, you're looking at your local universities and seeing what type of business research is happening and whether you can potentially help out with that yourself is also a great opportunity as well.
Cool. Yeah. And I see we have one other question too about rankings of different BSMD programs. That one's a much harder thing to do than you would actually anticipate because the BSMD program, like the undergrad, is going to be ranked different from the um, medical school. And so, how do you necessarily compare kind of those two things? And so, we don't actually, you'll see all the time, like, the top 20 BSMD programs and stuff like that. There definitely are higher tiered ones. And that's what we usually do with our students is have different tiers of which ones are the more competitive kind of and the best ones typically. And then kind of the mid tier pretty good ones for undergrad and for medical school, and then the lower tier ones as well. And that's something that we do work with our students, but unfortunately, we don't have that like available to the general public just because it is a little bit more arbitrary of what goes to what. So no set. This is the best one. This is the worst one, kind of thing. But that's something to look at too, because each one is going to be very specific to you. So, ultimately, one thing I would suggest too about BSMD programs is, the undergrad isn't necessarily important as like where you're going to go to medical school. So, like choosing based on the medical school is going to be more important sometimes than just looking at the undergrad, because some of them do feed into like really great medical schools, even if it's like a name you've never heard of. So, look into that as well. But yeah. I think that might be our last question. Do you have anything else you want to add, Kevin?
I no, I think you covered it pretty well there. The only other things is, if you're looking for stuff you can do on your own, it's only going to help a little bit. It's not going to help a lot, but looking at medical school rankings, right? So you can identify, if this BSMD program leads to that medical school, right? That's something you can do on your own. The only other thing I'd highlight as well is just the fact that with a lot of BSMD, there is a preference for in-state. So I would just, as a starting point, look regional to your area.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. It always helps. There are some programs that are very open to out-of-staters, but depends on where you're at. So do your research carefully. That's ultimately something we'd be able to help with too. All right. Well, everyone, thanks for, let me check last time for comments, but I think that was it. Yeah, so everyone, thanks for sticking with us for almost an hour and 15. We had a lot of fun with you guys, and we hope to see you at the next webinar. Bye.